You're a young princess, barely 18 years old, standing at the ornate doors of a foreign palace on your wedding day. The silk of your gown rustles as you take each trembling step toward what should be the happiest moment of your life. But instead of joy, terror grips your heart because you know what awaits you isn't just a marriage ceremony, it's a medical examination so invasive, so humiliating, that it will haunt you for the rest of your days. You're about to become the latest victim of one of history's most barbaric royal traditions, the virginity test, where your worth as a future queen would be determined by the findings of court physicians, who would probe and examine your most intimate anatomy while your future husband and his advisors watched from the shadows. What you're about to discover isn't just another tale of medieval cruelty, it's the hidden story of how royal marriages became public spectacles of female degradation, where the most private aspects of a woman's body became matters of international diplomacy. These weren't isolated incidents carried out by a few deranged monarchs. They were systematic practices that persisted across centuries and continents, turning wedding nights into medical procedures and reducing royal brides to nothing more than breeding stock whose value could be measured by the intact state of their hymens. Before we delve into these forgotten stories of royal humiliation, if you're fascinated by the dark truths hidden within history's most prestigious courts, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're watching from. I find it incredible that we're uncovering these buried secrets together from different corners of the world, connected by our shared curiosity about the shadows behind the crown jewels. The practice of virginity testing wasn't born from medical necessity or genuine concern for royal lineage. It emerged from something far more sinister, the complete objectification of royal women and the paranoid obsession with bloodline purity that consumed European nobility for centuries. These examinations represented the ultimate expression of male control over female bodies, disguised as legitimate royal protocol, but functioning as elaborate rituals of humiliation designed to break the spirit of young women before they ever set foot in their new kingdoms. To understand how these tests became entrenched in royal tradition, we must first examine the twisted logic that justified them. Medieval and Renaissance courts operated under the assumption that a woman's virginity was not just a personal attribute, but a commodity that could increase or decrease a kingdom's value in international negotiations. A virgin bride represented untainted bloodlines, guaranteed legitimacy for future heirs, and proof that the bride's family had successfully guarded their most precious diplomatic asset. But more importantly, it demonstrated that the new queen could be molded, controlled, and dominated by her husband without the complications that might arise from previous intimate relationships. The examinations themselves were conducted with the cold precision of military inspections, stripping away any pretense of dignity or privacy that these young women might have hoped to maintain. Royal physicians, often accompanied by midwives and court officials, would perform detailed physical examinations that went far beyond simple verification of an intact hymen. They would inspect, measure, and document every aspect of the bride's anatomy, creating detailed reports that would be filed away in royal archives like property assessments. But the true horror lay not in the physical examination itself, but in the psychological warfare that surrounded it. These tests were deliberately designed to be as traumatic and degrading as possible, serving as the new queen's first lesson in her complete powerlessness within the royal hierarchy. The young women subjected to these examinations weren't just having their virginity verified, they were being systematically broken down and rebuilt as compliant royal wives who understood that their bodies belonged not to themselves, but to the crown. The process typically began weeks before the actual wedding, creating a prolonged period of anxiety and dread that served to further destabilize the bride's mental state. Palace officials would inform the young woman that she would need to undergo examination by royal physicians to ensure her fitness for marriage. The clinical language used to describe these procedures masked their true nature. They weren't medical examinations, but elaborate rituals of domination designed to establish the power dynamic that would define the rest of the marriage. On the appointed day, the bride would be escorted to specially prepared chambers within the palace, often rooms that had been used for similar purposes countless times before. The walls of these examination rooms held the echoes of generations of terrified young women who had endured the same humiliation. The furniture was sparse and clinical, an examination table, various medical instruments, and chairs arranged for the observers who would witness and document the proceedings. The psychological impact of these examinations extended far beyond the wedding day itself. Young women who survived these ordeals often developed what we would now recognize as severe trauma responses. They became withdrawn, fearful of physical intimacy, and psychologically fragmented in ways that would affect their ability to function as queens, wives, and mothers. The very practice designed to ensure the stability of royal bloodlines often created damaged individuals incapable of forming the emotional bonds necessary for successful marriages or effective rule. Perhaps most disturbing was how these examinations were justified and normalized within royal circles. Court physicians would present detailed medical rationales for the necessity of these tests, citing concerns about hereditary diseases, anatomical abnormalities, or the bride's general fitness for childbearing. Religious authorities would invoke biblical precedents about the importance of marital purity, while political advisors would argue that the kingdom's future depended on absolute certainty about the queen's virginity. These justifications created an elaborate framework of false legitimacy that allowed everyone involved to pretend they were participating in necessary medical and political procedures, rather than ritualized sexual violence. The institutional nature of these practices made resistance almost impossible. Young women who objected were labeled as having something to hide, while their families faced diplomatic consequences that could destabilize entire kingdoms. The examinations also served another crucial function within the power structure of royal courts. They established precedents for the ongoing medical surveillance that would define the rest of the queen's life. Once a woman had submitted to this initial violation of her bodily autonomy, it became much easier to justify continued monitoring of her menstrual cycles, sexual activities, and pregnancy status. The virginity test was just the beginning of a lifetime of medical control that would follow her every intimate moment. What made these practices particularly insidious was how they were presented to the brides themselves. Palace officials would frame the examinations as routine procedures that all royal women underwent, creating the illusion that resistance was not just futile but abnormal. Young women were told that their cooperation was essential for the success of international alliances, the stability of kingdoms, and the happiness of their future marriages. The elaborate deception went even deeper than simple medical justification. Royal courts developed sophisticated propaganda campaigns designed to convince these young women that the examinations were actually privileges, special honors reserved for those destined to wear crowns. Palace tutors would spend months preparing brides-to-be with carefully crafted lessons about royal tradition, emphasizing how previous queens had undergone similar procedures with grace and dignity. They would share fabricated stories of legendary queens who had supposedly welcomed these examinations as opportunities to prove their worthiness for the throne. These preparation sessions were masterclasses in psychological manipulation. The young women would be told that their willingness to submit to examination demonstrated their commitment to their new kingdoms, their respect for royal protocol, and their understanding of the sacred duties that came with queenship. Any hesitation or fear was reframed as selfishness, a failure to prioritize the needs of their future subjects over their own comfort and modesty. The ceremonies surrounding these examinations were choreographed with the same attention to detail as coronations or state funerals. Every aspect was designed to reinforce the legitimacy and necessity of what was essentially institutionalized assault. The brides would be dressed in specially designed gowns that could be easily removed, their hair arranged in styles that wouldn't interfere with the examination process, and their jewelry selected to project an image of royal dignity even in their most vulnerable moments. Foreign ambassadors and court officials would gather in antechambers adjacent to the examination rooms, creating an atmosphere of international importance around what was fundamentally a violation of human dignity. These observers would later file detailed reports with their own governments, describing not just the results of the examinations, but the bride's demeanor, her level of cooperation, and any signs of resistance or distress that might indicate future problems with royal authority. The medical instruments used in these examinations were often specially crafted for royal use, ornate and expensive tools that served to further legitimize the proceedings. Palace goldsmiths would create examination speculums decorated with precious metals and gems, turning instruments of violation into symbols of royal prestige. These elaborate medical tools would be displayed prominently during the examinations, their beauty masking their horrific purpose and adding another layer of surreal dignity to the proceedings. The physicians chosen to conduct these examinations were carefully selected not just for their medical expertise, but for their absolute loyalty to the crown and their willingness to participate in what they certainly understood to be unnecessary and traumatic procedures. These doctors often came from families that had served royal courts for generations, creating dynasties of medical professionals whose careers depended on their willingness to violate their oath to do no harm whenever royal politics demanded it. The documentation produced during these examinations became some of the most closely guarded secrets in royal archives. Detailed written reports would describe every aspect of the bride's anatomy, noting not just the state of her hymen, but measurements, observations about her general health, and predictions about her fertility and ability to bear sons. These documents would be sealed and stored in palace vaults, accessible only to the highest levels of government and future generations of royal physicians who might need to reference them during the queen's childbearing years. But the examinations themselves were just the beginning of a comprehensive system of bodily surveillance that would follow these women throughout their entire reign as queens. Palace physicians would monitor their menstrual cycles with obsessive precision, documenting every irregularity and reporting directly to the king and his advisors. Sexual encounters between the royal couple would be scheduled and supervised, with court officials maintaining detailed records of frequency and timing to maximize the chances of conception. The queens who endured these systems of control developed various survival strategies to maintain some semblance of dignity and autonomy. Some learned to dissociate mentally during examinations, training themselves to endure physical violation while preserving their psychological integrity. Others became masters of manipulation, learning to use the court's obsession with their bodies as a form of political leverage, carefully timing announcements about their health or fertility to influence diplomatic negotiations. The most tragic aspect of these practices was how they created cycles of trauma that passed from generation to generation. Queens who had survived these examinations would often become complicit in subjecting their own daughters and daughters-in-law to the same ordeals, convinced that this was simply the price of royal power. The normalization of sexual violence within royal families created environments where abuse was not just tolerated, but institutionalized as tradition. The international nature of royal marriages meant that these practices spread across borders and cultures, with each court developing its own variations on the basic theme of bodily control and humiliation. Italian courts might emphasize religious aspects of the examinations, while Germanic kingdoms focused on the medical and scientific justifications. But regardless of the specific cultural packaging, the fundamental purpose remained the same: the complete subjugation of royal women through ritualized sexual violence disguised as legitimate state protocol. These stories of systematic cruelty disguised as royal protocol remind us that power unchecked by compassion creates monsters, not monarchs. The young women who endured these horrific examinations weren't just victims of individual sadists, they were casualties of entire systems designed to strip away their humanity in service of political ambition. Their suffering echoes across centuries, demanding that we remember not just the glittering crowns and golden palaces, but the broken spirits and shattered lives that built the foundations of royal power.